was just very honored that David Fincher thought of me. And if David was making it, it would be successful, and it would be excellent, because that's who he is. For me, it was personally very gratifying, because I had been an actor for 30 years, but it was the first time that I really came to the attention of a wider audience in such a positive way.
How do we get ahead of crazy if we don't know how crazy thinks?
I'm very happy that I was involved with it. I wish we were coming back.
Yeah.
It seems as though, the show has been put on indefinite hiatus, as you know, and it's hard, not to think that the longer that time goes by without us, going back, that it becomes, unlikely that we'll ever go back. And it's a shame. But, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm not the boss, and if David doesn't want to make the show, then that's his decision. I've already been the beneficiary of his generosity many times. But as time has gone on now, and I haven't heard anything further. Now it's beginning to feel like probably we won't come back. It's with quite a lot of regret that I move on from Mindhunter.
Another child reported missing in Atlanta.
I'm sending you both. I want you there for the duration.
So all these children, one killer.
I believe that to be the case.
I always saw the show as an ensemble, because obviously Jonathan's character is very important, and Anna Torv's character is very important, and I was one of the leads. I was very gratified when they decided to explore in greater detail my home life, the domestic life, and my relationship with my wife and my adopted son.
We need to stay focused. If you're distracted...
I have some things to deal with at home. It's personal.
I think that in order to have a well-rounded character, we really have to see that side of him.
Yeah.
It's one thing to see a detective who's at work and, and studying, these killers and trying to catch them and stuff. But I think the audience really wants to see and needs to see what happens when he goes home at night, and who is he there. And so I was very happy when it became clear to me that the writers were going to focus a lot on that.
We travel around the country and teach FBI techniques to cops.
You guys mind if I bother you for a minute?
She was found cuffed and lashed to the bed.
And what did you like the most about this idea of exploring the criminal mind?
Well, look, I've always been really intrigued by criminal psychology and what makes a man commit a crime, and particularly these sexually motivated crimes, because it's very easy to understand a burglar or an armed robber. They're motivated by financial gain. But when you're talking about a guy who kidnaps a complete stranger to torture, rape, and murder her, it's much more complicated, much more difficult to understand. I was always kind of fascinated by that. It was more than just morbid curiosity. I really wanted to try to understand it. And Mindhunter, gave me a really, really strong motivation to try, to do as much research as I could and understand as much as I could, what the things that these detectives try to understand.
We should be using every resource we can, talking to the smartest people we find from the broadest possible spectrum.
It's all based, of course, on the work of John Douglas, who was the author of Mindhunter, and along with Mark Olshaker, and was one of the most celebrated, FBI agents, and one of the really prominent early guys in the behavioral, science unit at the FBI. And I got to know Jonathan, and he was very generous to me and invited me to his house in Virginia, and he would share materials with me, including the case file for the Atlanta child murders and all this stuff that, so, that's the exciting thing about this job that I have, is you get to go into worlds that you would never otherwise really have a reason to visit, and meet people that you would have never otherwise met, and have experiences that you would never otherwise have had, and study subjects that you might not have studied. You know, all of our cases are based on the real crimes.
Yeah.
Right. It's a dramatization of a true story, and so you have to study. Whether it's Ed Kemper or Charles Manson or David Berkowitz or whomever, you've got to spend the time to familiarize yourself with these killers and the nature of their crimes, because this is all going to come to play, when we do these interview scenes.
One more thing. Manson is small, like really small. Try not to stare.
The last time we talked, you mentioned that this Mindhunter was like a graduation for you with David Fincher. How's working with him as a storyteller?
Look, I can give you a very simple answer to that question. He's the best director in Hollywood. Okay?
Yeah.
It's not more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And, when people say, well, why do you say that? I say because I've worked with a lot of the really famous directors in Hollywood. I've been very lucky in my career. Not always in the lead. Maybe I was in a small part, but I was there.
Yeah.
I was on set. I was watching. I was learning. I was soaking everything in from very early, periods in my career. And I can tell you that no one is as meticulous as David. No one is more prepared than David. No one thinks, in more detail about his shots and about his story and the characters, and no one brings more craft.
Yeah.
No one is more driven to make something as good as it can possibly be. And, a lot of people talk about the number of setups, the number of takes, you know what I mean? Isn't he getting far more coverage than you really need for a television show? And, and my answer to that is, I work with a lot of directors who have a very different style, and they just kind of run and gun, and if they get one that looks good, they move on. David likes to have choices when he gets into the editing room, and I don't blame him for that. And in terms of my contribution as the actor, I love what I do.
Yeah.
I love going to the set. I love acting. So to ask me to do it multiple times is not an imposition. I would rather do that because it gives me more opportunities to get it as good as it can be.
Yeah.
You're always worried when a director does one or two takes and move on. Oh God, did we really get it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It could have been, So when you spend more time, look, anything in life that you try to do too quickly, the quality suffers.